What if I told you a loaf of bread once cost just a few pennies, and a pint of milk was cheaper than a bus fare? Back then, a single wage could feed a whole family, and no one thought of it as luxury. Before supermarkets and online orders, one trip to the high street decided the meals for the week. Picture milk floats on quiet mornings, corner shops buzzing, and the clink of coins in your pocket. Every price tells a story, and when you hear what a house cost, you just might gasp. £1 in 1960, what it was really worth. How far do you think a single pound could stretch in 1960? Back then, a pound note was nothing flashy, just a stiff green slip of paper, but it carried real weight. It sat folded in your father's worn wallet, or tucked neatly into your mother's purse, treated with quiet respect. On payday, that single note meant the week was covered. Rent paid, bread and milk on the table, butter in the pantry, maybe a little lefty over for a few sweets or a Saturday cinema ticket. Picture it, £1 filling a whole shopping bag, the sound of coins clinking as change was counted out, the smell of fresh bread on the way home. For most families, this was simply life. No one thought it remarkable. Today, £1 barely buys a loaf of bread. The note itself has almost vanished, replaced by coins and contactless taps. And yet, remembering it makes us pause and wonder, how did we once make so little go so far? The price of bread, a daily staple. How much do you think a loaf of bread cost in 1960? Back then, bread wasn't just food, it was the heart of the table. A fresh loaf cost just a few pennies, wrapped in paper and still warm from the local bakery. Walking home with it under your arm, you'd smell the crust and feel the heat through the paper, tempted to tear off a piece before you even reached the front door. Bread was cheap enough to feed a whole family, but valuable enough never to waste. Every crumb mattered, turned into sandwiches for school, toast for breakfast, breadcrumbs for pudding. In its own way, bread told the story of the decade, simple, practical, and shared. Today, loaves come sliced, sealed into plastic, and stay soft for weeks, but somehow they've lost that magic. Thinking of paying just pennies for something so essential feels almost impossible now. And yet, if you close your eyes, you can still smell that warm crust and hear the crackle as you broke it open. Milk and dairy, morning essentials. Do you remember the sound of clinking bottles on the doorstep at dawn? In 1960, milk didn't just arrive, it came with a ritual. The milkman's float hummed softly down quiet streets before sunrise, leaving neat rows of glass bottles, their silver tops catching the first light of day. Children would rush to the door, sometimes peeling off the foil to sneak a taste of the creamy top before anyone noticed. It wasn't just milk, it was the start of the day. Poured over steaming porridge, stirred into endless cups of tea, or whisked into custard for Sunday pudding, milk was everywhere. Butter and cheese were simpler too, sold in paper-wrapped blocks that left your fingers faintly greasy. Today, milk rarely clinks on the doorstep, and few children know the joy of that cream top. What was once a daily sound has almost vanished, but one whiff of warm custard or a memory of that early morning clink can take us right back to those quiet, shared mornings. Tea and sugar, Britain's favourite comfort. How many cups of tea do you think were brewed in Britain in 1960? Back then, tea wasn't just a drink, it was the pause that held the day together. Kettles whistled on the stove, steam misted the kitchen window, and someone measured tea leaves carefully by hand, spooning them into the pot. You waited while it brewed, biscuits lined up on a plate ready for dipping. Tea wasn't rushed or grabbed on the go, it was shared. A moment to sit, talk, and catch your breath after work or school. Sugar came in paper bags that spilled if you weren't careful, and every spoonful felt like a little treat, sweetening not just the tea but the conversation. And of course, a good gossip could keep you at the table longer than you planned. Today, tea bags and electric kettles make the process quick and easy, but the ritual has faded. Still, the sound of a teaspoon clinking against a mug can take us right back to those slower, softer afternoons. A pint at the pub, cheers to cheap beer. How much do you think a pint cost in 1960? Back then, the pub wasn't just somewhere to drink, it was the heart of the neighbourhood. A pint cost just a few shillings, poured with care into a heavy glass that clinked against the polished bar. The air was thick with the smell of tobacco smoke and malt. The brass fittings gleamed, and the chatter rose and fell like an old familiar song. It wasn't only about beer. The pub was where news travelled faster than the papers, where friendships were sealed, and where fathers and uncles traded tall stories at the end of a long week. Children waited outside with a packet of crisps and a bottle of lemonade, listening for the laughter spilling out of the door. Today, a pint can cost as much as a small meal, and the old smoke-filled snug has nearly vanished. Yet one sip of bitter ale, or the memory of glasses clinking, can still transport us back to those warm, crowded Friday nights. Cigarettes and tobacco, the everyday habit. The sharp crinkle of a packet, the scratch of a match, and that first curl of blue smoke. In 1960, these sounds and smells were everywhere. Cigarettes weren't just common, they were part of the rhythm of daily life. You could buy 10, 20, or even a single cigarette, handed over with your change at the corner shop as casually as a loaf of bread. Smoking was more than a habit, it was social currency. Shared on factory breaks, after Sunday dinner, or in the back of the pub, a cigarette was an invitation to talk, to pause, to belong. Ashtrays sat proudly on coffee tables, and glossy magazine ads made it look glamorous and sophisticated. But the glow came with a price. Homes grew hazy, fingers yellowed, and health quietly suffered. Today, public bans and plain packaging have nearly erased the ritual. Yet the faint smell of tobacco on an old jacket can still pull you back to a world where smoke hung in the air like memory itself. Petrol prices filling up in the 60s. The hiss of the pump, the click of the nozzle, and the faint smell of petrol rising in the warm air. In 1960, filling up was almost a pleasure. Petrol stations were small and personal, a single pump, a smiling attendant, and a forecourt that smelled of oil and sun-baked tarmac. A few shillings could keep the car running for school runs, shopping trips and Sunday drives through winding country roads. But stopping for petrol was more than a chore. It was an event. The attendant tipped his cap, checked your oil, wiped the windscreen, and chatted about the weather while the tank slowly filled. Children pressed their noses to the glass, watching the numbers turn on the pump as though it were magic. Today, filling up is quick, quiet and cashless. No small talk, no windscreen wipe, no cap tipped. Yet the smell of petrol can still spark our memories of Sunday afternoons, slower roads, and the feeling that the journey was part of the adventure. The cost of a new car, or when minis ruled the road. Keys jingling in your hand, the smell of fresh upholstery, and that first proud turn of the ignition. In 1960, owning a brand new car felt like crossing into another world. The launch of the Mini changed everything. For just a few £100s, a family could roll off the forecourt in a motor that was small, clever, and perfectly suited to Britain's tight streets and terraced driveways. But a car was more than metal and wheels, it was freedom. Suddenly, Sunday drives became routine, seaside holidays more frequent, and visiting the in-laws less of a production. Children still remember the squeak of vinyl seats sticking to their legs on hot days, the wind whipping through the open windows, and the rattle of luggage tied to the roof with rope. Today, new cars cost a small fortune and bristle with screens and sensors, and yet the sight of a classic Mini still makes us smile. A little reminder of when the open road finally belonged to everyone. Bus and train fares, public transport on a budget. Step onto a bus in 1960 and you'd hear the hiss of doors, the clink of coins and the shuffle of everyday life. Public transport wasn't just about getting from A to B, it was a shared ritual. A couple of coins could take you across town, and a train ticket for a seaside trip felt like holding a promise in your pocket. Conductors, with their metal ticket machines clicking like clockwork, moved through the aisles, tearing stubs that children proudly collected. What looked like an ordinary ride was something bigger. The bus was where neighbours swapped gossip, schoolchildren claimed the back row, and tired shoppers rested heavy bags on their knees. Train carriages were small theatres of life, newspapers crackling, tea sloshing in paper cups, and then the countryside blurring past. It wasn't just transport, it was the spirit of the age. Today, ticket prices bite harder, but the smell of diesel and the rattle of rails still carry us back in time. Cinema tickets, a night at the pictures. Walk past the glowing marquee in 1960, and it was like stepping into another world for the price of a chocolate bar. The ticket booth's little sliding window clicked open, coins changed hands, and the usher, torch in hand, guided you down the aisle. Velvet curtains framed the screen, the lights dimmed with a hush, and the air carried the mix of popcorn, perfume, and cigarette smoke that made the night feel electric. At first glance, it seemed simple, just a night out. In reality, it was far more. The cinema was where first dates bloomed shyly in the dark, where families ducked in from rainy Saturday streets, and where children's hands stuck to sweet wrappers during matinees. It may have faded, but its glow still lights up the decade. For many, these were not just films, they were rituals, weekly adventures. Tickets may be 10 times the price today, but the flicker of a projector or the smell of popcorn still drops you right back into those red velvet seats. Television licenses and sets, the price of entertainment. Imagine the glow of a television warming a living room in 1960, its wooden frame humming softly as the screen flickered to life. Owning a TV felt like holding a window to the wider world. Families would gather, lights dimmed, as if preparing for a small ceremony. And to make it official, a TV license, just a few pounds a year, arrived as a paper notice you dared not ignore. It looked simple, a license and a screen. But television was much more. It brought the nation together. The Queen's speeches, football matches, and beloved comedy shows became shared rituals. Evenings once spent around the wireless now centred on this glowing hearth of the home. Behind the style was a hidden story of the decade, technology knitting communities together. For families, this was just normal life. But today it feels strange. Screens are everywhere now, yet rarely unite us. One crackle of static still transports us back to a time when TV truly felt like magic. House prices, the big shock. Picture stepping onto the doorstep of your first home in the early 1960s. A neat semi-detached with a garden, a garage, and room for the kids. Back then, buying a house didn't feel like signing away your future. Prices were modest, deposits small, and a mortgage could be cleared over a couple of decades. One salary could cover the lot, and the dream of home ownership felt tangible. It looked simple. Work hard, save a little, and get the keys. But it was much more than practicality. That first home meant stability, pride, and independence. It was the foundation of a dream, the first real sense that you had made it. As the decade progressed, prices crept upward. By the 1970s, homes became investments rather than affordable milestones. Today, those early price lists seem almost unbelievable, a nostalgic reminder of a time when owning a home was within reach for ordinary families. Renting a flat, city versus countryside. Step inside a 1960s flat, and the experience depended entirely on location. In London or Manchester, rents were higher, spaces tighter, and neighbours practically on top of each other. A single room could eat into your weekly wage, but it came with the buzz of city life. Work nearby, nightlife around the corner, and the pulse of the swinging 60s at your doorstep. Venture into the countryside and it was a different rhythm. Rents were lower, flats larger, and landlords were often farmers or local families. You gained peace, a little patch of land, and the calm of slower days, but gave up easy access to cinemas, pubs, and department stores. At first glance, it seemed practical, just money and space. In reality, it was a choice of lifestyle, the electric energy of the city or the quiet charm of rural life. Either way, renting in the 60s was far cheaper than what we call affordable housing today, and far less of a financial burden. Gas and electricity, keeping warm for less. Imagine the soft glow of a gas fire, the crackle of a boiler, and the gentle hum of electricity lighting a 1960 home. In 1960, keeping warm didn't need modern thermostats or smart meters, just careful use of gas and electricity. A single stove heated the kitchen, while a few radiators spread warmth to the rest of the house. Families learned early how to layer up, wear slippers indoors, and make every flame count. At first glance, it looked practical, just fuel and meters. In reality, it was much more. The smell of a warming kitchen, the comforting glow of a fire, and the rare hum of appliances like washing machines or irons were daily rituals. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Heating bills now can soar, and electricity is everywhere yet unnoticed. Still, one flick of a gas tap brings back evenings huddled together, warm, cosy, and content. Water rates, when bills were tiny. Picture the gurgle of a tap in a 1960s kitchen, enamel basin ready, kettle steaming on the stove, and water bills were tiny, just a few shillings, and most households barely gave them a second thought. Every drop counted, yet it never felt like a burden. Taps filled basins for washing, kettles for tea, and tubs for scrubbing clothes. Rainwater might be collected in tanks, and clever families stretched every pint without waste. At first glance, it seemed simple, just a supply of water. But in reality, water shaped the rhythm of daily life. Mothers timed baths, children waited patiently for their turn under the tap, and the soft hum of a kettle signaled tea time. Every splash, drip, and pour had its place in the household routine, weaving moments of connection between chores, meals, and conversation. For For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern meters, monthly statements, and rising bills make water a constant concern. Still, the sound of a dripping tap or cold water running over your hands can transport us straight back to those shared simple moments of life in the 60s. Clothing and fashion, dresses, suits, and school uniforms. Step into a 1960s home and clothing was more than fabric, dumbo. It was family, pride, and routine woven together. School uniforms were starched and ironed, collars crisp, shoes polished to a shine. Sunday bests were saved for church or visits to relatives. Dresses swayed on little girls' knees, suits hung neatly on boys' shoulders, and everyone had at least one outfit that made them feel special. At first glance, it seemed practical, clothes to cover and protect, but in reality, clothing told stories. It signalled identity, social standing, and care. Hand-me-downs weren't cast-offs. They carried memories stitched into the seams. Hats, gloves, and coats completed the picture, turning daily dressing into a small ritual of pride. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Fast fashion and casual wear have replaced these careful routines. Yet the smell of fresh laundry and the feel of starched collars can still transport us to a school morning in 1960, where style and ceremony were inseparable. Shoes and accessories, style on a budget. Picture polished leather shoes clicking on cobblestones in 1960, little girls in patent Mary Janes, and boys in smart brogues ready for school. Scarves, hats, and gloves completed each outfit, carefully chosen and often handed down from older siblings. Shoes and accessories were more than necessities. They were small luxuries families treasured. At first glance, it seemed practical, something to wear, but in reality, these items told stories. A child's first steps in school, a father's pride in a polished pair for Sunday church, or a family's care stitched into every glove and scarf. Accessories weren't just decoration. They reflected style, thrift, and the personality of the wearer. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern convenience and disposable fashion have made these small treasures rare. Yet the shine of polished leather, or the snap of a well-worn glove can still transport us to a world where every detail mattered, and style was measured in care as much as money. Food shopping, a full basket for pennies. Picture stepping into a 1960s market, wicker basket in hand, coins jingling in your pocket. Fresh vegetables piled high, sun-ripened fruit smelled sweet, and the butcher sliced meat to order, wrapping it carefully in brown paper. A few shillings could fill a basket to bursting, enough to feed a family for the week. At first glance, it seemed practical, just shopping. But in reality, it was much more. Markets were social hubs where neighbours exchanged gossip, children ran between stalls, and shopkeepers knew your name. Every purchase told a story, what was seasonal, what was affordable, and what would bring a smile at the evening table. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Supermarkets dominate and convenience often replaces ritual. Yet the smell of fresh bread, the rustle of paper bags, and the feel of coins in hand can still transport us to those bustling streets of 1960s Britain, where every shopping trip was a shared moment of life. Meat and fish, Sunday roast costs. Imagine the aroma of roasting meat or fresh fish filling a 1960s kitchen, drawing the family together. A few shillings at the butcher could provide a joint for the week's Sunday dinner, while fish from the local shop promised a Friday night treat. Meat and fish weren't just food, they were the centerpiece of weekly routines, the reward after a busy week of work and school. At first glance, it seemed practical, just ingredients for a meal. But in reality, it was much more. Sunday roasts brought families together around the table, carving joints with care, passing vegetables, and sharing stories. Fish and chips were a Friday indulgence, eaten piping hot from paper wraps, the aromas lingering in the kitchen long after the plates were cleared. For families, this was normal life. But today it feels strange. Modern convenience stores and ready meals have replaced much of the ritual. Yet the memory of sizzling pans and Sunday smells can transport us straight back to those kitchens of 1960s Britain, where meals were both nourishment and shared moments of connection. Fruit and veg, greengrocer prices you won't believe. Step into a 1960s greengrocer and the shop bursts with colour. Shiny apples, sun-ripened tomatoes, and leafy greens piled high in wooden crates. The scent of fresh produce fills the air, and a few pennies could buy enough to feed a family for days. Children tugged at their parents' hands, eager to pick a shiny orange or a bunch of bananas. At first glance, it seemed practical, just food, but in reality, it was much more. The greengrocer knew every family by name, offered tips for selecting the ripest fruit, and sometimes gave children a small treat. Shopping was social, educational, and even theatrical, with scales clinking, paper rustling, and voices calling out specials. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Supermarket aisles may be longer, but the charm is gone. Yet the smell of fresh fruit and the feel of a ripe tomato in your hand can instantly carry us back to those bustling streets of 1960s Britain, where every shopping trip was a shared moment of delight. School fees and supplies, the cost of education. Picture a 1960s classroom, pencils neatly lined up, notebooks stacked, and uniforms carefully pressed. Sending children to school was routine, but families still budgeted for small costs. Fees were modest, school supplies inexpensive, and even a new slate or set of crayons felt like a tiny investment in the week ahead. At first glance, it seemed practical, just education. But in reality, it was much more. School supplies shaped daily routines and childhood memories. The smell of fresh ink, the scratch of chalk on a blackboard, the crisp turn of new pages. Each item was treasured, and losing a pencil or notebook caused genuine concern. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Now supplies pile up, fees soar, and much of that tactile charm has disappeared. Yet the rustle of a notebook, the scent of a new book, and the feel of a freshly sharpened pencil can instantly transport us back to classrooms of 1960s Britain, where every school day held its own small rituals. University and tuition, almost free learning. Imagine walking through a 1960s university campus, books tucked under your arm, lecture halls buzzing with ambition. Tuition fees were minimal, and many students managed with small grants, part-time jobs, or help from family. Libraries smelled of polished wood and old pages, offering a quiet sanctuary for a study, while cafeterias served simple meals and bicycles became a student's trusty companion. At first glance, it seemed practical, just education. But in reality, it was much more. University shaped independence, friendships, and futures. Every penny mattered when balancing books, rent, and the occasional night at the cinema. Life on campus was about discovery, responsibility, and community. For families, this was normal life. But today it feels strange. Tuition now runs into thousands, and student life is almost unrecognizable. Yet the memory of walking campus corridors, exchanging ideas in the common room, and carrying notebooks under your arm can take us straight back to the hopeful, affordable university experience of 1960s Britain. Wages and salaries, what people actually earned. Picture a 1960s payday, coins jingling in pockets, notes tucked carefully into wallets. A weekly wage could cover rent, food, and small treats, leaving enough to save a few shillings for emergencies or a night out at the cinema. Men and women often worked long hours, but the steady rhythm of earning and spending created a comforting structure to life. At first glance, it seemed practical, just money in your pocket. But in reality, it was much more. Wages shaped family routines, buying groceries, paying the milkman, milkman, saving for a new suit or a weekend outing. Every coin counted, and even small bonuses brought pride and quiet celebration. A well-stuffed purse carried a sense of accomplishment and security. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern wages are complicated by taxes, bills, and mortgages that dwarf those modest sums. Yet the rustle of notes, the jingle of coins, and the simple satisfaction of a full purse can instantly transport us back to 1960s Britain, where every penny mattered and life felt manageable. Taxes, how much the government took. Imagine a 1960s household opening a simple paper form on payday. Income tax was taken, but families often felt they could still manage. There was room for a weekend treat, a small saving, or a night at the pictures. The process was straightforward, a clear calculation, a paper form, and the knowledge that everyone was in the same boat. At first glance, it seemed practical, just money sent to the government. But in reality, it was much more. Taxes quietly shaped daily life, funding schools, roads, hospitals, and public services. Families rarely questioned it. It was part of the rhythm of existence. You knew what to expect, how much to budget, and life went on. For families, this was normal life. But today it feels strange. Modern tax codes, deductions, and digital forms make it complex and sometimes frustrating. Yet a glance at an old payslip can transport us back to simpler times, when taxes were modest, routines were predictable, and life felt manageable. Holidays, seaside trips on a shoestring. Picture a 1960s family crammed into a small car or train compartment, children pressing their faces to the window, eyes wide with excitement. A few shillings covered a week's stay in a modest guest house, a bag of seaside sweets, and an ice cream on the pier. The seaside wasn't luxurious, but it was enough to create lifelong memories. At first glance, it seemed practical, just a short trip. But in reality, it was much more. Holidays were moments of escape, bonding, and simple adventure. Sandcastles, paddling in cold waves, and chips eaten from paper wrappings were treasured experiences. Families huddled under windbreaks, listening to gulls and neighbours' laughter, soaking in a shared sense of freedom. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern holidays come with soaring costs, crowded airports, and endless planning. Yet the smell of salty air, the crunch of sand underfoot, and the taste of a seaside ice cream can instantly transport us back to carefree summer days in the 1960s Britain. Furniture and appliances setting up a home. Imagine a 1960s living room. Sturdy wooden chairs, polished tables, and armchairs that creaked with age. Kitchens held simple appliances, gas cookers, enamel sinks, and someone perhaps a refrigerator if you were lucky. Every piece was chosen carefully, often saved for over months or years, each purchase carrying pride and meaning. At first glance, it looked practical, just furniture and appliances. In reality, it was much more. A well-placed armchair created a quiet reading corner. A polished table hosted family meals and celebrations. A simple oven filled the home with comforting smells. Each item told a story of care, thrift, and style. More than decoration, it was a statement of the time. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern homes are filled with disposable furniture and flashy gadgets, yet the scent of varnish, the warmth of a gas oven, or the comfort of a familiar armchair can instantly transport us back to 1960s homes, where practicality and personality met in perfect harmony. Healthcare, NHS costs in 1960. Picture a doctor's waiting room in 1960, quiet, orderly, and filled with the reassuring scent of antiseptic. The NHS, just over a decade old, offered free consultations and treatments, and the idea of a hospital visit emptying a family's pockets was almost unimaginable. Children's checkups, visits for colds, and even serious procedures were covered, giving families a rare sense of security. At first glance, it looked practical, just a system for care. In reality, it was much more. The NHS represented hope, community, and equality. Families trusted their local GP, nurses knew their names, and the hospital felt like an extension of home. The quiet hum of ward lights and the gentle footsteps of nurses became woven into daily life. For families, this was normal life, but today it feels strange. Modern healthcare costs, private insurance, and crowded waiting rooms can make it feel distant. Yet the memory of free care, kind doctors, and a system designed to protect everyone can transport us straight back to the comforting realities of 1960s Britain. Insurance and banking, money matters back then. Imagine stepping into a quiet bank in 1960, the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of coins on polished counters, and the shuffle of paper forms being passed to tellers. Savings accounts were treasured, and insurance policies, for homes, cars, even life, were carefully considered, offering peace of mind for a modest weekly premium. At first glance, it looked practical, just money in, money out. In reality, it was much more. Banking and insurance shaped family routines, taught the value of budgeting, and instilled a sense of security. Conversations about premiums or interest rates could stretch into the afternoon, blending education with reassurance, while familiar tellers became trusted guides in the small everyday economy. For families, this was just normal life, but today it feels strange. Online banking, instant transfers, and automated policies have replaced these personal rituals. Yet the smell of paper, the feel of stamped ledgers, and the trust in a local branch can take us straight back to 1960s Britain, where money mattered, but didn't overwhelm life. Luxuries, radios, records, and chocolate treats. Picture a living room in 1960, family radio humming softly in the corner, filling the space with news, music, and drama. Turntables played vinyl records with care. The scratch, pop, and hiss made each song feel alive. Chocolate bars, candies, and occasional sweets were treasured, slowly savoured, and often shared between siblings or after completing chores. At first glance, it looked practical, just entertainment and treats. In reality, it was much more. Radios connected families to the wider world. turning evenings into communal experiences. Records sparked dancing, singing, and joy, while small sweet treats became rituals of delight, marking moments of indulgence and shared smiles. For families, this was just normal life, but today it feels strange. Streaming services, flashy gadgets, and instant access have replaced these simple pleasures. Yet the crackle of a record, the warmth of chocolate, and the hum of a radio can instantly transport us back to the cosy, cherished luxuries of 1960s Britain. Looking back, the true cost of 1960s life. Could you imagine living on just a few shillings a day and still feeling rich in moments and memories? In 1960s Britain, life was simple, tangible, and measured in small joys: a loaf of bread, a pint of milk, a chocolate bar, or a night at the cinema. Wages, rent, and shopping balanced carefully, yet families found time for shared laughter and quiet celebrations. At first glance, it looked practical and just the cost of daily life. In reality, it was much more. Every penny carried purpose, shaping routines, memories, and connections. Families lived fully, savouring small pleasures that are almost impossible to experience today. Which of these prices or moments surprises you the most? For many, this wasn't just money, it was the rhythm of life, shared and cherished. Share your memories in the comments and subscribe to keep these forgotten moments alive. Could you still imagine living like this today? Vanished school puddings, fading cookbooks, custard's warmth, and cafeteria laughter. Could you imagine those simple joys today? Each dessert tells a story of childhood, family, and shared moments that shaped everyday life in 1960s Britain. For many, these weren't just sweets, they were memories, rituals, and little comforts we all cherished. Share your memories in the comments, and subscribe to keep these sweet, forgotten moments alive. Could you still taste them if you tried?